So Charlie's a rangeland management specialist with the USDA NRCS. He's going to share a project about restoring rangelands following the Martin Fire in Nevada. Each of our presenters, again, are going to have, what did you say? You have 7 to 9 minutes, I think. Very specific. 7 to 9 minutes to share, give us an introduction. They're going to talk about what inspired their case study, what they did, what they've learned from it. And then we're hoping to have plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion amongst them. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Charlie.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, see if this works. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Ooh, maybe I'll have to go like this. Okay, so anyhow, again, my name's Charlie Clements. Thank you for having us today. Mark and Caleb couldn't make it. They're on the field. So anyhow, this first picture kind of shows you what we deal with disturbed rangelands. Even though this is an old fire, what our job is try to get perennial grasses in there so that we can reduce the field load of the invasive grass, cheatgrass. So how this all took place is back in 2018, July 4th weekend, we had over 435 acres that burned. You can see the old fire scars on this slide. You can see islands of sagebrush. This is critical habitat for sage grouse and mule deer, as well as other sagebrush obligate species. So we're pretty concerned when you have such a vast area burn that we just have a moonscape out there where we're really going to have negative impacts on the wildlife and also on the grazing resources. So this kind of shows you the moonscape. A difficulty we ran into is when you have so much habitat that burns, how do you prioritize these sites? Another problem we run into is, what seed species are actually available at this large quantity. And then we got to go through the purchasing problems and then contracting with different contractors, whether it's aerial seeding or the drill seeding. And then because it's such a long process, you got a lot of weather conditions. You got frozen ground, you got mud, then you got snow, drift wind or drifted snow. So it's hard to get in and out. So the players in this, the large part, because this is public land out here, the Bureau of Land Management is the big player. They have personnel that has expertise on the ground as far as, what was there before the fire, what the conditions were. Of course, we deal with the livestock operators as well because they are on the ground. A big part of this partnership that we had was Nevada Department of Wildlife. Their personnel being able to tell us where those sage-grouse habitats were, where the corridors for the wildlife like mule deer or pronghorn were. Those were important. And as far as us at the Agricultural Research Service, we got decades of research in this area. So our input was what we've learned in the past and ways in which we can go in and control weeds, but at the same time, species that are successful. So whether it's the pre-emergent herbicide, how to use it, when to use it, or after a fire, if it's a sagebrush fire and it burned hot enough for a long enough period of time that it really reduced that cheatgrass, we can go in with more desirable species that actually have the inherent potential to germinate, emerge, and establish on that site. And that's probably the most important point. Instead of just going out to a site and putting a cafe of seeds out there, we have experience in those species that actually have that inherent potential. So this is actually how the process starts. Even though this is an annual grass stand up on the top left, that's your initial problem. Even after a fire, you're going to be converted to invasive annual grasses in most cases. So we go in, we do these weed control practices with pre-emergent herbicides. We do plant material testing. And then you can see when we do these plant material testings, if we're in there, we're testing shrubs, grasses, and forbs. If I got a handful of species that work and 2 handfuls of species that don't work, I'm going to stick with those species that actually work. And our goal is, and it's always our goal, is to reduce the fire threat, the wildfire threats on the landscape. And so that bottom right restoration photo, you can see where we're using perennial grasses that were successful at the site. And on the outside, you can see the invasive annual cheatgrass. So we're going to reduce that fire frequency that in an invasive annual grass every 5-10 years, we're going to reduce that significantly. So again, when I talk about contractors and logistics, there's only so much area that you can actually put that drill in the ground, you know, so we do a lot of aerial seeding. But if you can get that seed placed in the soil, that's the best opportune time or position for that seed to be successful. So with the proper seed mixes, all that, we can actually go and do that. Again, though, with the weather, you know, the mud, the frozen ground, that's not good for seed placement as well. And then in the process of doing all this, we had a government shutdown. So we really heavily depended on the Department of Wildlife being a state agency to take that approach where they could just put that on their shoulders and we wouldn't be delayed throughout this process. So they continued to purchase seed. They continued to pay the contract for the drills. We had 3 tractors, 9 drills, and then we had a couple of helicopters at the same time. Again, we seeded over 70,000 acres that first year. We used a pre-emergent herbicide and some other habitat that was cheatgrass dominated on 65,000 acres. And then again, that following year, after we let that herbicide fallow for 1 year, we seeded all that habitat as well. Really, the take-home message for this whole project was our partnerships. Partnerships allowed us to be successful, to meet at that round table, if you will, and to make sure we had the proper seed mixes, the proper methods, and that we didn't have a slow process and be delayed as far as implementing the project. And so just to end it out, you started with a moonscape out here of 435,000 acres that were burned. Some of that habitat is going to come back with residual vegetation, but we know the habitats that burned hot and are less likely to. So at the bottom left is our broadcast seeding. So that's an introduced native mix. It's very successful. The livestock folks out there said they've never seen this much forage. And then on the right, you can see some folks said, oh, you don't need to seed. It'll come back residual plants. You know, that's just a waste. We have 5 times as much perennial grass where we seeded versus where we didn't seed. On top of that, we were very successful with broadcasting on Wyoming big sagebrush and yarrow. What we did there is we tripled the rate, 0.75 pounds per acre of sagebrush and 0.25 pounds of yarrow. But we only did it every 3rd pass. So we were actually doing about the same we are on an acre, but we just did it every 3rd pass. And so we were very successful. And the wildlife folks are ecstatic at the results we're getting. So again, thank you for your time. This was, I hope to be able to tell you more results.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, let's give him a hand. Thank you for that introduction to the project. Yeah, I'm sure we will have a lot more questions. So stay tuned. So we are next going to go to Jeremy Walker, who is also online. So let's see, Charlie, I think if you can stop sharing your screen. And then
we good?
Yeah. And then Jeremy, you can share your screen. Jeremy will share a project on the Corta Madera Ranch to diversify their Angus cattle herd in pursuit of a cattle biotype more adapted to a dry, hot environment.
Good morning.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, let me get my screen brought up here. Can you see that now?
Sure can.
Okay, let me get in the slideshow. Okay, so like she said, I work for Rancho Corta Madera, and we are in Southern California, San Diego County. Pine Valley, California is the city we're closest to, but this place has been a ranch for, well, the house that I stay in was built in the 1880s, so at least that long they've been raising cattle here, and various types and versions over the years. But prior to the project we were involved in, we were mostly an Angus cow-calf operation. But because of drought conditions over the past, I would say 2 or 3 decades, there were some problems with that, problems with making a profit, problems with overgrazing the land, damaging perennial grasses. So we made some changes. And I should say I've been here for 2 years. The guy prior to me was here for 23 years. So he dealt with a lot of getting us to where we're at now. And it's my job to keep that going. So some of the issues, exceptional droughts, which you guys have talked about, right? So Southern California is no stranger to exceptional droughts. over the past 20 years, I think our average has been 22 inches of precipitation, but there was a year where we got 7 inches. Last year we got 38 inches, which was nice, but our average is about 22. And there's been lots of ups and downs. So raising a traditional English cattle breeds was getting more difficult, right? So we were raising Black Angus, and there were profit losses. There were boom years where we would buy cattle, bust years where we'd sell cattle, and it was a lose situation, right? You're selling these cows off, then just to rebuy heifers later, and you're just always losing in that situation. It's not sustainable. So, and not to mention the native grassland damage, like the last gentleman was talking about the perennial grasses, right? I mean, grazing these big Angus in these dry years, we were losing a lot of our perennial grasses, which is not good, and which was making more space for these invasive annuals, much like a wildfire would. So switching to the Rauramiri criollo like we have has helped bring back a lot of our perennial grasses. Also, large distances between waters. So we put in a lot of solar wells recently, but there's still pretty far distances between our water troughs. And switching to this particular cow breed, the Rauramiri criollo, has allowed us to open up more grazing land because of the distances between our waters, and because, to be realistic, we're not like Kansas or the Midwest somewhere. We're probably 25% grassland, 75% shrubland and forest, right? So the criollo use a larger percentage of our land, which gives our grasslands a little break. Selling a marketable animal, that's been the biggest struggle, right? The Rauramiri criollo cow, although they use our land a lot better, it's not necessary. If we're going to stay in the beef market, for us, selling to the traditional beef auction or traditional paths, straight criollo wasn't necessarily marketable. So we had to figure out, how can we make this marketable? And then the last thing is maintaining the sustainable herd, right? So if you're selling a crossbred calf and you're saying a cow-calf operation, how can we sustain that without constantly having to buy new replacement stock, right? Which can get expensive. So solutions. So like I said, first we had to match the cow to the land. So we're a Mediterranean climate, mostly wet winters, dry summers, and the precipitation varies, especially the last decade. If I was to show you the plot graph I have, the last decade has been a lot more boom and bust, really, really wet years, followed by really, really dry years, lots of ups and downs, right? So we need a cow that can maintain their body condition no matter what our precipitation is, right? So the Rauramiri criollo cow fit that really well. It's a Spanish cattle breed brought over with Columbus that we got through a partnership with New Mexico State, who I believe is there as well. And they've been really well for being our cow herd, right? The next thing is we had to match the bull to the cow, right? So like I said, we want to sell a traditional beef animal, but we don't have Angus cows, right? So how do we do that? Well, we decided to maintain 4 to 5 low birth weight, high CD Black Angus bulls. So like a bull you would breed to your heifer Angus. And we breed those to these cows because these cows weigh anywhere from 800 to 1,000 pounds tops. So if we don't go for low birth weight, high CD bulls, then we're more likely to have calving problems. So sticking to that type of bull, we haven't had any calving issues, knock on wood, with these criollo cattle or the criollo heifers that we keep. They've been just fine with those low birth weight, high CD Angus bulls. And that allows us to produce a traditional beef animal. In this picture here, the calf in the middle as a straight Rauramiri criollo, and the calf on the left, I don't know if you can see the one on the right too, but the one on the left, that's a crossbred. So half Angus, half criollo. Selecting for sustainability, I talked about that. I believe we've done the best we can for our land to select for sustainability by keeping our criollo cows and then breeding them to Angus bulls. Marketing the animal, we were getting better at that. I don't think that we're all the way there yet, but we're getting better at marketing that animal while still maintaining our land. It's been difficult, but I think people are coming around. to realizing that, yeah, it's not a purebred Angus, but in reality, it finishes out just about the same and just as good as a purebred would. And we're able to raise a third more cattle on our land while still improving the quality of the land in drought conditions, which is pretty amazing. Future-proofing your operation. So that's the thing for us, is because we're crossbreeding cattle, and all the crossbred calves are getting sold, right? So how do we future-proof to where we're not dependent on other people for replacements or constantly buying replacements? We just now branched out to do our own replacements. We have a seed stock herd where we keep a Rarmuri Criollo bull with specific Rarmuri Criollo cattle that we like the genetics to get our own replacement heifers to replace our cows over time. We're still dependent to buy low birth weight ICD bulls, Angus bulls, but that cost is less than replacing all our cows, because our cows are the major part of our herd, right? So key players for us, obviously we are New Mexico State, Texas A&M, Jornada Experimental Range, the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project, and Resource Conservation District of San Diego. Another key player is like, if a ranch were to make a change to these Rarmuri Criollo cows, I would recommend having some really good ranch hands, because they are different to work with than a straight beef cow. You know, they get gentle just fine, but they're just different. They need more space. We work them all horseback, so our ranch hands are necessary for our operation, to say the least. The how-tos. One thing I always tell people is there's no one-size-fits-all situation or one-size-fits-all solution. You know, this works for us because of our climate, our land, and what we're trying to do. You know, if what works for us doesn't necessarily work for, even in San Diego County, the guy, I know some ranchers that have ranches on the coast, and their lands are way different than ours and the amount of moisture they get. So this isn't even necessarily the right solution for them. But it fits our climate because, like I said, my second bullet, we evaluate our land, right? Like I said, 25% grassland, 75% shrub and brush and trees, right? So this type of cow is more meant for our environment. Our climate, you know, wet winters, dry summers, really up and down. So we're an arid Mediterranean climate. You know, we need a cow that can fit in that climate. And I think we found it. Dig into your numbers. That's been a big thing for me, like since I've taken over, is to figure out, okay, we have this kind of sorted what fits our land, and how do we make that economically sustainable for us, right? Where does our market fit? Can you sell direct to consumer where you're at? Are you going to have to sell to the livestock auction? You know, it's different for everybody, depending on where you are. Ask lots of questions. That's been good for me. People always have stuff to offer, and you'll find answers in the most unlikely areas and from the most unlikely people. Just being, and like the next one, being open-minded, you know, not having all the answers, listening, taking things in, trying stuff out. Knowing and judging your herd has been huge for us to get a better herd, because we're doing something a little different. So we gotta really be selective on the heifers we keep to get a good cow herd going forward, because some of the cows produce really good animals that are crossbred and some don't, you know. So, and some have mentalities that we like and some don't. So being selective is key for us, and finding reliable and trustworthy partners, which I think we've done with New Mexico State and all the people I listed prior. We also partner with the Forest Service on some grazing leases that we've worked with them for a while. So that's been key for us. And that's pretty much all I have. This is my number here. If you guys ever want to call or you have questions about our operation or how we're getting to where we're going. I will say, even though we're in San Diego County, our ranch has done a great job, luckily avoiding any major wildfires since like the 1970s. And I like to think it's a lot because of the way that the ranch has been managed. You know, they've done a great job grazing it, a great job of keeping the land from having any major big annual grass invasions. So anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you for your moment. That's great. And I know there will be questions for Jeremy. Now we're going to turn to our in-person panelists. I'll keep kind of going backwards through the list. So Ashley, I'm going to turn it over to you next. Ashley Hall is an area extension agent with the University of Arizona, focused on rangeland management and livestock production programming. We got that right. And is going to talk about collaborative planning for drought on public grazing lands. Also, hope I got that part right. And so we need this, and we probably need. Oh, do you have some?
I thought I emailed them to you.
Okay. Yeah, the other time.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have Ashley's slide? Or this
Oh,
one
oh.
here? Oh, there we are. Got it. Get them shared and you'll be good to go. Thank you, Maddie, for helping.
While they're getting that loaded up, full disclosure, I came into the very tail end of this project, so I can't take a lot of credit for some of the great things that happened at the beginning. But I did kind of help carry it forward once we did actually experience a drought within Gila County. So Dr. Mitch McLaren, Kelsey Landreville, Mike Crippens, who I'm sure many of you know, and then Dr. Jim Sprinkle, who was my predecessor. He retired and I took his position. Those are the main key players that kind of got this collaborative drought planning going. So just to give a little background, so I cover Gila and Pinal counties, which is in kind of central Arizona. Gila County is pretty much 90% federal land. So any rancher that I'm working with is grazing on federal land. They may have 20, 30 acres of deeded land, but the majority of their grazing is occurring on the forest. And so in 2002, there's a pretty significant drought in Gila County, and the Forest Service made the decision to remove all livestock off of all 104 allotments. No questions asked, no case-by-case basis. And so that was a pretty big hit. That's about 20,000 cows that were taken off the landscape. And so that really caused a lot of friction within the county because a lot of the ranchers were pretty upset that they weren't looking at each allotment on a case-by-case basis. And so a lot of contention began to grow, and the university kind of stepped in to try and figure out what we could do to improve drought preparedness and kind of repair those relationships. And if anyone's worked with extension, sometimes we kind of get brought into these situations to kind of play the peacekeeper and the middleman, and that was exactly what happened in this situation. And so this was a NOAA NIDIS funded project. And so the TANA was involved at all levels. The Gila County Cattle Growers was also involved. And then those are some of the other folks from the University of Arizona that were also brought to the table to help facilitate. So Julie Bruger is a social scientist that led a lot of the facilitation between the two groups. So what we did was we had 3 workshops. I was hired on, and I hadn't even signed my paperwork yet, but I had an offer. And so Dr. McLaren was like, hey, we're having one of these drought workshops. I know you're getting hired on, please come. So I was kind of, like I said, I came on at the very tail end. So at those 3 workshops, we were kind of hoping to bring everyone together. The first one was just more of kind of talking about what the issues were. And then the second workshop, we had an interactive Excel spreadsheet that kind of allows you to plug and chug numbers. So it's an hypothetical, they called it the sprinkle ranch. And basically you could kind of change your pasture size, your forage production, some other climate things. And so that kind of helped identify pinch points of issues that may come up with different drought scenarios. I think that was really helpful to get everyone kind of talking and thinking about how things change with drought. The second thing that was created was Dr. Crimmins created this great SPI Explorer tool and climate dashboard. So for federal allotments, the Forest Service uses SPI as a trigger for drought threshold. And at the time in 2001, they were using a -2 SPI as their reasoning for removing all livestock. Since then, the Region 3, which includes the Tonto National Forest, has changed their policy to a -1 SPI with a preceding 12-month period to make, because of a lot of the controversy surrounded by that -2 SPI. And so this SPI Explorer tool allows you to drop a pin on any location, and it gives you historical precipitation, historical temperature, and one of the best features I think that I know I've used and other ranchers have used is a drought. I always forget. It's like a drought matrix, and it kind of gives you an idea of where you could go moving forward with different SPI values, depending on past climatic information. And so that's been used a lot for folks kind of planning on, well, I think maybe if I get this much precipitation, I should move into this SPI value. And then the last thing was the guide to co-developmental drought prepared plans. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that was Kelsey's master's project. And that guide is basically a set of 7 worksheets. And a lot of those worksheets are kind of helping folks think about things for the future. So there's a kind of a what if, and it kind of helps folks get things on paper to kind of think about, if this happens, this is what I could do. If this happens, this is what I'll do. And so those worksheets are really great. A lot of them are, so there's also one that kind of helps prioritize different improvements that may need help or to be managed better to help you get through a drought. So some of these worksheets are kind of more gauged towards folks that are grazing on federal lands, but some of them are also more applicable to just the general rancher. One of those also includes kind of a evaluation once you kind of get out of severe drought to help you think about what you did, how it worked, what you can improve for the next drought. And so this is the website where you could find all of these tools that I just talked about, and there's even more publications about best practices for placing rain gauges on an allotment, or how to build your own rain gauges, that kind of thing. So this has just been a really great dashboard and resource that kind of combines all of these resources that kind of came out of this project. Oh, so one of the things that we really wanted to do also, we wanted them to be prepared for future drought, but we also really wanted to kind of help bridge those relationships. Obviously, the ranchers are going to have to work with the Forest Service if they want to graze on their allotment. So really just trying to help build those relationships and getting folks to the table to kind of come to a central understanding. And we were pretty successful in bridging that gap. So 60% of ranchers and 80, sorry, I'm being dyslexic, 83% of the Tonto staff felt that they were more prepared for drought as well. So kind of the results. So I said I kind of came into this at the end and then helped carry it through. So my second year on the job, the county experienced a pretty significant drought. And so instead of having just another, let's remove all the livestock from the forest, the Forest Service was really proactive with engaging with ranchers. They held kind of a town hall where we went over all of these tools again and let them know that those resources were there. And then they, asked questions. And it was really great. And I think this also kind of helped repair some of those relationships because again, the Forest Service was coming to the ranchers to kind of let them know what their plan was on the federal side. One of the big things that was kind of interesting is if any of you, deal with public land ranchers, there's always a lot of hold up with getting improvements or projects done because of EA or a NEPA, the NEPA process. And the Forest Service came to ranchers and we actually used one of the worksheets that was in the guide that helped kind of prioritize improvements that needed to be done. So they went to ranchers and said, what can we do to help you get through out? And so they kind of did, we called it an EA rodeo, where they got all of their folks together that needed to do the EA in a room, and they just knocked out a bunch of approvals for improvement projects to also kind of help ranchers get through that drought. And that's pretty much all I had. Another thing that kind of came out of this that wasn't necessarily part of this funded project was my predecessor also helped implement a long-term vegetation monitoring program. So in 2006, when ranchers were wanting to start getting cows on the ground, there was no really quantitative data to support those decisions. And so he started a long-term monitoring program that I've since expanded to all 104 allotments across the Tonto. So that was another really great thing that kind of came out of this drought in the early 2000s. And And we have also surveyed ranchers about the monitoring program and the Tonto staff. And they've also said that, you know, us being out on the ground and monitoring together and talking about on the ground conditions in real time has also really helped improve, continue to improve those relationships.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. Really interesting. Oh, so Mel is next. So, while Maddie has your presentation pulled up. Mel, who many of you probably have met yesterday and today, of the Cody Family Ranch, runs a cow-calf operation on the Navajo Nation. Mel's going to talk about a project that he did on his ranch. He is really active in raising awareness of federal funds that are available for drought adaptation projects and supporting other Native ranchers with finding federal funding, including EQIP, I think helping with their EQIP application. So I want to invite Mel as our next speaker, and Maddie's going to hand out the fact sheet. I am back to advance and make sure we're.
Morning, everyone.
Whoops, I just accidentally advanced it, sorry.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
won't touch
That's
it.
okay. I only have 8 to 10 minutes anyway, so you're probably helping me. And the first 3 presenters stole all my thunder, so I don't have anything to talk about.
I got it.
But anyway, this is a typical representation of where I graze cattle. This is in the fall, winter, so the grasses are in the dormant stage. But right now the grasses are kind of nice and green out there. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I do have some handouts that were prepared. And Maud, is she on the line? I'd like to give her credit, her and her team, people like Ariel Ledger, Aaron Connolly, those kind of folks helped me with the case study to develop the handout here. So you can take that with you. And if you could, I don't know, post it at your community center where you work at, share it with your colleagues. If you have some tribal agricultural producers, that's my target audience. And that's who I really want to present to. But in doing this, having come from a long career in law enforcement and military background, I didn't know much about ranching, so I had to learn. I had to come to venues like this, training, education, and just feeding off folks, industry experts like yourself, to make me sound like I kind of know what I'm talking about. Attending Ashley's monthly trainings with U of A, New Mexico State University, those types of organizations. So anyway, I am located northeast of Flagstaff, by the bird flies, about 45 miles. That's where my ranch is. I live in Flagstaff. And it's just a small cow operation, maybe 50, 60 cattle, but it keeps me busy. When I first took over the ranch, I realized that I needed to know a lot more. And having grown up in ranching, I thought I knew what I was doing, but I was severely wrong. So I needed to not only educate myself, but how do I help the land? How do I help the animals? How do I help the ecosystem? How do I help my livelihood? Okay, I was really concerned about that. So I started to look into people, to experienced ranchers, rangeland specialists. And I really leaned a lot on district conservationists like Mr. Clements here, and then experienced ranchers like Jeremy, because they've already been through it. Why reinvent the wheel? Let me just copy what they're doing and then just make it tailored to my needs. On tribal land, primary is open range. It'd really be nice to have cross fencing so I can really effectively implement rotational prescribed grazing. It's a little bit of a challenge, but you know what? I embarked on this water project because my natural recourse concern was clean, quality water for my livestock, instead of them drinking from old, dirty dirt tanks. And so, to make a long story short, I was working with my conservationists, with my local cattle association, and before you know it, I had an EQIP project through USDA. Had to do a comprehensive range conservation plan, which now, since I'm in the knowledge, I also consult with other organizations to help other ranchers and producers develop their conservation plans. In that, I started out with the EQIP program, which stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which greatly enhanced my operation because they provided the funding in order for me to implement those practices that I needed to do, because I didn't have $250,000 in my banking account. So you know what? I've been a taxpayer all this time, so I'm going to borrow back from the government, and I didn't have to pay it back. But since then, having proven myself, the USDA reached back out to me and awarded me a conservation stewardship program, which helps me continue to do the maintenance and operation from there on. So EQIP, you can find this on the NRCS website. This is just kind of a nuts and bolts definition of what EQIP's about. I won't spend too much time on that because unless you're going to apply tomorrow, then we can go through it. That's just a windmill, a rehabilitated windmill that was dilapidated. But the one remarkable thing about this windmill, and this my ranch house is back this way to the right about a mile, is that it produces a lot of water. I forget how many gallons per minute, but it's constant 12 months a year. And I was constantly wasting water right here. It was the primary watering point for my livestock. And you'll see this common on the reservation, as Stanford will tell you, since he's a grazing official out there. I developed my water project based on this water source, which is a little brackish, but it didn't have any contaminants in it. So you could drink it, but it tastes very good, but it was perfectly fine for cattle. And I strategically placed pipelines, and in total about almost 10 miles, other watering points in the area on my rangeland, which encompasses about 30,000 acres. So this helped me out a whole lot. In the summertime, the cattle didn't have to travel too far. Mamas didn't have to leave their calves too long to get back to, because you have a predator problem as well. And then, of course, the heat index out here gets pretty warm. But bottom line is, it caused me to implement my rotational prescribed grazing practice, which the NRCS requires, and I have to monitor and I have to keep tabs on. But you know what? The benefits of it was rehabilitation of the land, the forage, and it bled over to herd health. I had healthier cattle. I had less problems with mortality, better birthing success, come breeding time. And one thing I want to know, when I show in my training, I show this windmill pre my project. If you look on Google Earth, there's almost like a perfect 2-mile circumference circle that's just all brown. And this is the only watering point. The reason for that was because all the cattle were constantly there. They were stomping, they were grazing, overgrazing it, and they weren't branching out. In the summertime, they don't go too far because they get thirsty. As soon as they go a mile out, they got to come back and drink again. So for that purpose, but you know what? If you go on Google Earth now, that circle is no longer there. The whole area is collectively much greener. And I'm just dumbfounded, or I'm just actually impressed on how much difference that made, and that made me a believer out of the program. Conservation plan, and right, I don't even say the pointer, but right in the middle there is that windmill that I showed you, and then the pipeline showing that, just kind of a diagram of where I put these tanks to help facilitate my rotation. And you can rotate cattle without fencing. Made a believer out of me. I was kind of skeptical, but the district conservation said, "See, I told you so." I said, "Yeah, you're right." Of course, construction phase, a lot of hard work. You gotta roll up your elbows. You can't be afraid to get your hands dirty, but you know what? You're working towards a purpose. So being organized, having equipment, having the folks, having logistics in place, that's all key. You have to be a good manager. And if you don't, you got to find somebody that can. And then the end result, when I was all done, it was very satisfying because I knew I was doing something not only for myself, but for the land, which I was entrusted by my grandparents to take care of and helping the animals, you know. And here it just says, it'd be a worthwhile venture. And to just kind of just close up about my project, when it was all done and NRCS signed me off and said, hey, you did a good job, and I started reaping the benefits, I couldn't help but coming up with a quote. This quote doesn't belong to me exclusively because I'm good about borrowing material or words or ideas to make it work for myself. So some of these words are mine, some I borrow, but bottom line, this is the way I felt. Okay. And everybody else that follows my lead, my example, and there's not many, I'm trying to get more, they all felt this way, and how could you not get emotional, when you care and you love something so much that, it causes you to think this way. So I spend a lot of my time bringing about awareness. I think that's my platform, not necessarily signing up people for equip, not necessarily telling them, there's a better way, but in essence, that's what I'm doing. But I want to reach a broader spectrum of grassroots producers so they can help themselves, help the land, help the people, and help future generations, right? And when you help future generations, guess what? Sustainability comes up. And that's what I'm all about. And that's what I'm focused on. And that's what I get when I attend these venues. So I'm looking forward to speaking with to more of you. Please read the article, not the article, the little case study there in front of you. If you have more questions for you, I'm available. Business cards, and if you have a place for me at one of your venues, please invite me. I'll come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel.
Oh, by the way, the last slide is my contact.
Oh, look at that. Take a picture quick. Okay. Yes. Yeah, you're stuck here for a little bit longer. All right. So rounding out this really excellent panel is A.T. Cole, who has been restoring Pitchfork Ranch in New Mexico for the last 18 years. Now maybe it's 19 or 20 since the case study got done. Addressing a number of things, including climate change impacts. I pulled this right from your case study. Species extinction, soil depletion on a really unique landscape. So AT is going to share his story with us. And then we are going to have a good amount of time for some questions. So start thinking about what you want to ask these folks with a lot of wisdom. And you need that, and you might need that as well.
I guess you're gonna do the poker for me or the.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
You do the poker.
Good morning.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Well, we've been there for 2 decades now, and so when Maud asked me to do this, and she said, we'd like to do it in 7 to 10 minutes, so after 2 decades, it's kind of hard to compress it, but so what I've tried to do here is this chart over here, these same location photographs are to illustrate what you get when we do this. When we bought the ranch, we'd done a lot of Sierra Club volunteer trips when we were during our work life, and we got into this restoration. So we were going to buy wilderness and restore it. And we found that you couldn't buy wilderness, it's not for sale. So the cattle ranch is the closest thing you can find. So we bought this ranch, and this ranch has a cienega on it. And we didn't even know what a cienega was, but depending on who you asked, there were many hundreds, if not thousands, of cienegas in the Southwest before the Spanish arrived. And today, over 95% of cienega habitat is lost. So we have one of the few remaining restorable cienegas on the Pitchfork Ranch, and about 2 miles of a 48-mile-long water course, Pearl Cienega, runs through the Pitchfork Ranch. So what I've done is I thought I would just talk to you about the kind of grade control structures that we use. We've installed 1,000 grade control structures. About 800 of them are hand-built. The other 200 are machine-built. And we've planted or propagated about 1,000 trees. So there's a recent science study that says that wet spots like cienegas or marshes capture 5 times more sediment than forests and 500 times more than oceans. So all of a sudden, we're starting to think, we're not just restoring the cienega for wildlife to breed, birth, and rear their young. We're also addressing the climate crisis. So our focus, our focus is on restoring the cienega, but we're thinking more in terms of the climate crisis and knowing that we're actually doing something that's productive. So if you would start flipping me there, thank you. So there's about 12 different kinds of structures. These are all based on Bill Zeedyke, and his book is published by the Cabrera Coalition. It's called Induced Meandering, and I think it's probably the best book on how to do what needs to be done to the Southwest. The First Peoples, my understanding is the First Peoples, the translation for this property in the Southwest was horizontal yellow. And it used to be horizontal and it used to be yellow, but now it's been invaded by more and more shrubland and trees. And it's now incision, lots of incisions. So it's not as shallow as it was. And that's what we think we're trying to do, is we're trying to shallow our landscape, and we do it with these grade control structures. This structure is called the One Rock Dam, and it's built by the kids at the Aldo Leopold charter school in Silver City. They come out once a year, and you put one tier of the rocks, and then assuming you get rain, you can't do restoration without rain. You get flood water come down, and these structures capture suspended sediment in the water flows, and then it fills up, and then you come back and put a second tier on top of the first tier, and then you come back and put a third tier on top of the second tier. So this is 3 tiers of a One Rock Dam. So these kids have done really a fabulous job, and this is on close to Seaport Road, so I get to show this off quite a bit, and it really illustrates how much what the benefit are of these structures. We've only done this one time. This is called an interior log jam, and you cut down a dozen trees, you lay them down like cigars in a cigar box, put heavy rocks on top, dirt on top of that, and you basically just cork that area. And what Zeedyke's trying to do, he's trying to change these water courses from straight water courses to how they were historically, and he's trying to induce a meander. So this was a straight arrow area, and so we corked it with this engineered log jam, and it turned the water to the right. So now this water course goes like this, and it turns to the right, and it turns back to the left. And of course, when you slow the water down, you also drop seeds, and so there's all kinds of consequences from that. This is a boulder baffle. This is a machine-built structure, and you can see what happens is the water comes here, it hits that, and it goes off to the left, and then it hits the berm on the other side of the water course. And his idea is it then deposits the sediment back behind. And if I had a picture, and I do have a picture of this today, there's a huge, all kinds of sediment behind there. So you can see where it goes around like this, and then it's a real common type of structure. We've done probably 24 of those. That's the same concept, only it's made with posts. And you can see what happens. I mean, you can see how the water has hit the grade control structure, and it's then water's gone off to the left. That structure is now gone. It's totally covered. You don't see it anymore. And we put these kinds of structures in the top 5 miles of an 8.3 mile reach of the 48 mile long Burro Siena water course. So we've got a grant now to do the lower 3 miles. This is a concept that we actually came up with this idea ourselves, and we've since abandoned it, and I'll show you why. But these work. We call it a perpendicular post vein. While Zeedyke's idea is to induce a meander, our idea is we do want to induce a meander, but we also want to raise the bed. And that's our primary goal. We want to be able to get the water back up so that the water can access the terraces. The terraces on both sides of this water course are horribly starved. And there were huge, giant saccatone patches, and we have 5 big patches on the ranch. The ranch used to be covered with giant saccatone, and now it's all starved out because the water can't access the terrace. So the idea here is, and we've experimented, this is a tooth here, so you dig a you can pound these in with pounders, or you can dig a trench, install them, and then backfill them. And we've done it with 2 rows and 3 rows and 1 row, and we find that the 1 row works just about as good as the 2 or the 3. But in any event, if you go to the next one, this is a great photo. Nobody told us when we started this, we didn't know much. And there were a lot of things we didn't know. But one of the things we didn't know was that when you build a grade control structure and you slow the water, you have this seed drop. So the water is coming from the north to the south. It's coming down this way, and you can just look at what's happened. That structure's been in maybe a couple of years, had 2 or 3 floods. It's a single perpendicular post fade, not a double, and it's working fine. It's captured all that sediment behind it, and then all the plant line. So now each one of those plants is a little grade control structure. So when the flood comes down, the water hits that plant, it drops the sediment, drops more seeds. So that's really just the lower portion of the ranch, the bottom 5 miles, was just like a bowling alley. I mean, there wasn't a thing in that water course but sediment. And now there are many thousands of plants as a result of these structures. This is a Zuni bowl. It's an idea that Bill stole from the tribe. Don't ever build a walkway. I had been there just about a year, and so I thought I was going to show off this beautiful area. So I built this little driveway by hand, and I see pieces of it 3 and 4 and 5 miles down the road now. So it's not there anymore. But the Zuni bowl is, and this is really an incredible idea. So the water comes down here, and it hits this, and instead of rushing down, it falls into that pool, into that bowl, and then it trickles over the edge. That's we've probably got a dozen of those. And if you look at the photographs over there, I think it's the fourth set down. On the left is the same place, and you can see in the 2 feet of incisions on either side, and they're totally gone now. It's filled up. We've probably captured 2 or 3 feet of sediment at that location. This is the same kind of structure. It's a boulder baffle. It totally covers. We have 5 of these structures in this huge drainage. There's a fellow that a retired Wyoming engineer, professor. He's a moth collector. He helped me do the calculations. I certainly couldn't. But there's 1,037 tons of sediment captured behind this structure. 1,037 tons. So there's about 4 feet of sediment there, and then there's 5 structures. They're not all this big in that drainage. So there's probably 5,000 tons of sediment that's captured in that's one single drainage, and there's 32 drainages like that pour into the 8.3 miles on the ranch. So you can see how much sediment structures is captured. This is an idea that we came up with. You dig a trench and you put the posts in, but you put them in like this. So in effect, we were able to get 2 rows, but only 1 trench instead of having to trench 2 rows and then backfill and the expense that goes with that. So we call this a crisscross perpendicular post fade, and these hold up really well. The only problem is that we dug these out on the side and put rocks in thinking we hold it, and that's a mistake. You don't need to take the side out. You need to put a rock in front of it because the water just ends up going around. This is called Zeedyke calls these, wicker weirs, we call them woven weirs, and they're stepped down. This is at the very top of the ranch, and at this location, this is the first tier of these structures. So these are pounded in by hand, gotta get young men to do the work. These are pounded in by hand, and they're woven with willow branches. And this tier of 3 step down woven weirs, it's covered. There's a second tier atop the first tier, and there's a third tier atop the second tier. And at this location, we've captured 5 feet of suspended sediment. This area used to be a same location photograph like for there, but we can't use it anymore because it's so overgrown that you can't take a photograph. I mean, if you stand there, it's just weeds. It's so rich with vegetation. This is an idea that Bill Zeedyke came up with. It's called hinge felling. And what you do is you take this is only good for riparian areas where we've got, got trees and you've got water. So you take the tree and you cut it in half at the bottom, and then you notch it 3 or 4 or 5 notches. You do that so that it won't barbeture, and then it lays down, and then the branches turn into trees. And so most of these structures, the big structure you saw cost $2,500. The smaller ones cost about $500. These cost $50. So you take 3 trees and you spread them apart, and you hinge fell them, you lay them down. And if you'll flip it again, we've done cross-channel hinge felling where we cut them down across the Cienega, and then we've done some off-channel hinge felling, and all of a sudden it dawned on us, if there's a flood and you've got hinge fells across channel, you capture 20% of the sediment. But if you have off-channel hinge felling, you end up capturing 80% of that flood water. So that is 1 tree felled in 2011, and now there's 50 trees there off of 1 tree. And so when you get a flood, that water that doesn't even lay down anymore. It's so powerful that it just holds. And so the tree that we cut down is not visible, it's now subsoil. This is an idea, T-posts, Bill Zeedyke could probably get sick if he saw this, because I tried this with a T-post. And the posts that you buy now to build the grade control structures cost $11. T-post only costs $6. So I'm going to save money. I'm going to do a better job. So I build this, and that's what I got. So in terms of one of the things that I was asked to do is to provide a learning, and so the learning is you might think about it, but be cautious, because I haven't given up on this idea, but I think I'm going to not install it straight up and down. I'm going to leave it forward. If you'll give me the next one. If you build a grade control structure, you want to use 1C juniper. Never use pinon pine or. And this is what happens. They get rotten in about 2 years, and you lose them. We did a whole $30,000 project, and we couldn't get juniper posts, so we got the wrong kind of post, and that's what happened with it. So we learned that the hard way. I just built this put this together at the last minute when I was supposed to provide a learning. We didn't learn this, but this is a strong angle iron. You wouldn't want to use rebar, I don't think. But if I had to do this, when we started this, people told me take same location photographs right away, and then you can prove up what you're doing. Nobody told us to do this, but I caution you to do this if you have a grade control structure project. Is you buy an 8-foot piece of angle iron, and I did this with. I'd take it to a welder. I just did this with a piece of tape for illustration purposes, but you pound it 4 feet into the ground, and then every time you capture a foot of sediment, when you go to apply for a grant, and you've got a grantor, you can tell them, not that I think we've captured 4 feet of sediment, but in fact we've captured 4.5 feet of sediment. And here's the proof, because here's the photograph before it was installed, and here it is today. And then these, just to give you an idea, if you're gonna make these grade control structures, the juniper posts, and when you're pounding them down by hand, you know, they split. So we had these caps built to put over the top, so when you pound them down, you don't end up splitting your posts. Forgive me, but part of writing the book I found out is marketing book. So this book is going to be published on February 27th by University of Arizona Press, and you can learn more about it by going to the Pitchfork Ranch website, pitchforkranch.com, and you can pre-order the book or read the chapters and so forth. Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to start up again with the forest and fire success stories from resource managers. And we have 3 amazing case studies and speakers today. We are going to start out with Zaida Wasserman, who is from the Ecological Restoration Institute. And she's going to share with us her work on climate influences on future fire severity. And it looks at the synthesis of climate fire interactions and the impacts of fire regimes. So Zaida, if you are ready to share your screen, we are excited to hear from you.
Will do. Thank you. Okay, thank you for having me today. My name is Zaida Wasserman. I'm an ecologist at the Ecological Restoration Institute in Flagstaff, Arizona. I work a lot in the climate vulnerability and adaptation space, but also in the research space with best available science and some climate fire interactions. So that's what I'm going to discuss today is climate influences, predicted fire severity and force across the Western US. This stems from a paper my colleague and I recently published in the Journal of Fire Ecology. And it's a synthesis on the predicted climate influence on fire regimes and the impacts on fire severity, vegetation dynamics, and the interaction between fire, veg, and climate. So really we set out to describe predicted changes and what models are actually saying what's going to happen in the future with fire regimes and high severity fire. And as we dug into it, a lot of studies looked at options that might help mitigate some of these impacts of fire severity and moderate some of those vegetation changes. So that's what we're digging into today. Okay, so some background. We know that higher and drier conditions are coming. And we know that fire is also a keystone process, but warming temperatures and increasing aridity are influencing patterns of fire activity across the Western US. And climate change is changing fire regimes. Some long-term temporal studies have showed increase in fire frequency, fire severity, and increase in area burned over time. So over almost 40 years of temporal studies of fire, we're seeing an increase in all of these metrics. And so every year, we see a bigger fire that has larger patches of high severity fire, and we're seeing more fire across time. So we know that there's an increase in ignitions and a faster rate of fire spread due to decreased fuel moisture and extreme fire weather conditions. So that is all encapsulated in an altered fire regime that can increase the vulnerability of these systems to vegetation type change conversions, invasive species, impact wildlife habitat, and watershed health, and also infrastructure. So here's a quick slide looking at the change in annual temperature by year 2100. On the left, you can see the moderate scenario, RCP 4.5, that shows that mean annual temperature is expected to increase 1 to 4 degrees Celsius in the Western US by year 2100. And then on the right is the extreme case versus RCP 8.5, which is even a higher rate of increase at 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. And those have large impacts. So it all ties in to how temperature and precipitation are going to impact forests and vegetation and fuels. Here is just a slide looking at the climate fire interactions because they don't act in a silo. We know that these interactions between climate, fire, and veg are important. So at long time scales, climate, veg, and fuels and weather influence fire behavior on the landscape, which equals fire intensity, fire spread, and severity. We also know that climate and weather drive forest fuel flammability, fire behavior, and fire patterns. And fire weather drives fire behavior at the time of the fire. So what will the future look like? Warming temps and changes in precipitation patterns are changing the landscape. So how will these changes in climate influence fire severity? So we did a synthesis of the literature. We had 5 different search engines and different keywords we looked at to find the body of literature that would assess this. And we wanted to know what factors are influencing fire severity, looking at the fire, vegetation, and climate interactions, and describe these predicted impacts, changes, and risks. So out of that synthesis, we found a lot of different things. So while forests of the Western US show a range of adaptation to fire, fire activity is likely to exceed the historical range of variability observed over the last 2 centuries, which is a huge magnitude. So there's going to be a lot more fire and an increase in fire severity. Hotter and drier conditions change fire regimes, and that equals more frequent fire, more stand replacing fire. We know that the drivers are increased temperature, drought conditions. There's a lot of fuel on the landscape, and fire weather definitely has a huge interaction. So these climate-induced changes in fire regimes will drive changes in fuel loads and fuel moisture conditions, drive fire severity, and impact species composition across Western US forests. Intensifying drought combined with abundant fuel loads also promotes more high severity fire. Alternatively, there is a group of the literature where some models predict increases in fire activity and imply that less biomass will be able to accumulate between each fire, meaning there'll be less biomass available to burn on a landscape post-fire over time. So if a landscape is burned and vegetation doesn't really come back, or it keeps getting reburned at high severity, that biomass decreases over time. And so that equals less fire over longer periods of time. But there's also a predicted increase in water deficit that could result in a decrease in biomass in water limited systems, causing a reduction in fire severity. So those are sort of the 2 camps. We'll see a lot of fires, and maybe vegetation comes back that has a higher flammability, so you keep reburning, or drought will cause less biomass, or drought and fire will cause less biomass over time. So that could reduce fire severity. But the recent increases in fire severity are attributed to climatic water deficit, favor pressure deficit, evapotranspiration, and forest fuels. And also fire weather and vegetation species composition also influence fire severity. So these graphs on the bottom show trends over time. On the left is climatic water deficit, on the right is actual evapotranspiration. So on the left, if you examine them separately, these trends of water deficit and actual evapotranspiration are mirror images of each other across the US. Water deficit equals drying, and an increase in the west and decrease in the east. Eastern parts of the US also often had increasing actual evapotranspiration, so on the right, while western parts often had decreasing actual evapotranspiration, and middle longitudes had mixed trends. So basically, climatic water deficit is the amount of additional water that would have evaporated or transpired if it was present in soils, given the temperature forcing. And actual evapotranspiration is the quantity of water that is removed from a surface due to the processes of evaporation and transpiration. Okay, so we know from our literature research that a climate-induced increase in fire activity is predicted in many forests across the western US. An increase in fire frequency, area burned, and fire severity is also predicted in these certain areas like the Rocky Mountains of Wyoming, Sierra Nevada in California, Central Oregon mountains, and in the Southwest US. These future projections suggest that northwestern US forests in wetter climates are predicted to experience an increase in fire frequency and decreased fire severity, whereas warmer and drier regions are likely to show decreased fire frequency and increases in fire severity. So climate fire vegetation dynamics. Changes in climate, specifically temperature and precipitation, can reduce overall vegetation biomass, change forest composition, and alter forest structure. Lots of times they force vegetation type changes to undesirable vegetation that you might not want on your landscape. Western-wide trends show colder northerly forests will be highly impacted. Music forests will remain more stable, and dry forest types will remain dry and experience shifts to shrubland and grassland. I should note that there were only 2 or 3 studies that looked western-wide trends, and the rest were very landscape-based. Here is just a figure that shows these climate fire veg interactions and how disturbance can cause mortality to recover in some cases, but it can also go to these alternative states. Increased fire severity impacts forest resilience and resistance, and increases the probability of forest type conversions in many ecosystems, and warming and drying trends will cause more frequent and severe disturbances. So climate change and high severity fire will drive changes in forest composition and structure, trigger some of these declines in biomass, and increase the probability of type change conversions in the future. So what can we do? Many of these studies showed modeling of fuels and restoration treatments can help limit fire severity and fire spread. So implementing those treatments sort of stops the rate of spread of fire and how severe it can get. Mechanical thinning and burning are therefore meant to create resilience and mitigate some of these effects in many areas and reduce the extent of high severity fire. So that's a good thing, implementing treatments to reduce area burned at high severity and overall type change conversions is a tool we can use and keep implementing and use it to be effective at reducing potential for crown fire, reduce the amount of fuels on the landscape, and promote forest resilience. But the big question is, can we keep up with the pace of wildfire and climatic influences? Implementing these treatments is slow. There's not enough boots on the ground. And so we want to try to increase the scale of that. And a lot of these initiatives in the infrastructure bill and with the wildfire strategy are meant to work on those questions. So there are some caveats though. Restoration and field treatments may be less effective in systems where the effects of future fire are more heavily influenced by climate variables than by the fuels on the landscape. So climate may outpace that. And also forested ecosystems often experience a lagged response to climate change, and they have what we call climatic debts, which occur when tree species do not track the changes in their climate suitability environment. So those are 2 things to think about. This climate veg disequilibrium is hard to predict the timing of that. So it's harder to predict the magnitude of change in the forest community shifts with climate change. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We will hold questions until all of our panelists are finished. And next, Sutton, do you mind stop sharing?
Yeah, let me,
Thank you.
it's bigger.
We're gonna hear from Rachel Foe, and she is from the New Mexico Forestry Division, and she's gonna tell us more about the New Mexico Reforestation Center.
Oops.
Thank you. And that was the perfect preface for my presentation as I'm talking about reforestation. So what comes after these huge fires. And that presentation also made me think of two things. One is this book called Fire Weather that just came out in May. John Valiant, I think, is the author, but it's about the Fort McMurray fire in 2016. And it is riveting. Somebody recommended it to me and I was sort of like, I'm in this industry, I don't know, kind of like a lot to handle. But the history, the culture, the science all mixed together, and how this fire was only, 7 years ago, and people had no bearing for a fire that's like this, and now, this is like kind of becoming normal. So really good book. The other thing I wanted to mention, yesterday, the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, who used to be the Wildfire Commission, they're a commission that was put together for Congress to provide a report on our whole situation. They released their final report, and it has 148 recommendations about what we can do. And it's, yes, there's suppression, but it's so much more holistically focused on what we can do before the fire and what we can do after the fire. So, okay. Is it this one?
See any button. What?
Okay. So yeah, my name is Rachel Foe, and I joined the Forestry Division in May of 2022, which is a really interesting time in New Mexico's history because that was our huge fire season. This is the Mora Research Center, the John T. Harrington Forestry Research Center, which is where we currently grow up to 300,000 seedlings a year, and we have our seed bank. And as you can see, this was from 2022. Hermit's Peak Gap Canyon almost came really close to that, and they had to evacuate all the seed and all the seedlings that we had there. At this time, I was the prescribed fire coordinator, which is also a pretty interesting role because these fires were started by prescribed fires. And so I didn't work a ton on prescribed fire. I was doing a lot of post-fire work, which kind of leads into reforestation. So I'm going to talk about why we need reforestation. Kind of like touching on what you just heard about, high severity wildfire, and then some of our reforestation pipeline challenges and maybe some of our opportunities. So we just kind of learned about these things. We have all of these things present in the Southwest: drought, extreme weather, pests and pathogens, and then over 100 years of fire suppression. And I always used to think of it as 100 years of fire suppression and kind of blame it on the Forest Service. And, that was the right thing to do at the time in people's minds. But some of the history that I've been learning about is also about human migration and how that suppressed fire just by having grazing in these spaces. Okay, so this is a picture of, I think it's Rio de la Casa, and that's where the headwaters of the Gallinas Creek are. And that's provides nearly 100% of the drinking water for the city of Las Vegas. And as you can see, it's completely decimated. In the industry, we call that nuked out. When you have huge impacts like this, I mean, it totally changes the water quality, as well as the amount that's coming down. Just looking at the geography, you can see how when the rain comes, it's going to like funnel down all those canyons and just create this huge debris flow. And those structures, like we heard about earlier, those are really necessary and needed, but it's still kind of on the front lines of can we do that at a big scale like this? So the city of Las Vegas is getting about $140 million new water treatment system, paid for by the federal government for a city of about 16,000 people. So another thing to note, and I can talk about the post-fire impacts, but in terms of reforestation, is when you have these large nuked out areas. This fire was 350,000 acres. A large fire used to be 4,000 acres. You have huge areas without any trees or any trees that have life. These trees maybe will live, but the seed dispersal rate is about 200 feet. So if you have these large areas without any way for the seeds to disperse, then you will get no natural regeneration, which is how forests used to regenerate naturally. Okay. So this increase in high severity wildfire means the degraded loss of soil and water, transition to other vegetation types, so no more forest, and less clean drinking water. I bumped slightly.
There you go.
Oh. So New Mexico forests supply 50 to 70%, 75% of all water used by municipalities and agriculture. So without forests, water doesn't look great. Okay. When this is on, you'll see this graph. The gray part shows the total need of reforestation from 1980 until 2020. And that the red is the wildfire caused need, and that has like really gone up, as you can see.
I think it's probably a cord. Waylon is not here at the moment either.
I don't see it.
When you bump the chair, but it
Yeah, no.
gets something back there.
Right.
There's nothing for it to do. That one, like, just giggled. Okay.
I mean, you can use them for reference.
Yeah.
And online.
So the point is that when Big Fire was only 4,000 acres, there was more natural regeneration. The Forest Service really planned on reforestation after timber cuts, and that coincides with their capacity for seed collection. So they weren't doing a ton of seed collection, just enough to like kind of replace those timber cuts. And they didn't anticipate these huge mega fires that we're now faced with. So that presents us with a huge challenge in terms of the reforestation pipeline, which is everything from seed to nursery to outplanting. So then when you plant the seedlings, the first part is seed. We don't have enough of it across the whole country. And the only way to get the seed is to collect the cones when they're ripe. The cones aren't ripe every year. We don't know, as humans, we don't have the science yet to predict when they're going to be ripe. It's like 7 to 10 years. So we had a big mast year here in New Mexico this year, but in the Pacific Northwest in California, they didn't hardly have anything. And then you have to have tree climbers that can climb to the top of these trees and collect the cones. And I was at a training at Santa Clara Pueblo a couple weeks ago, and I mean, amazingly, from day one, I knew nothing. And day 4, I was 80 feet up in a tree. But it was a slow process, and you have to really practice and know what you're doing in order to get efficient at it. So, but we had a collection. We got about 8 to 9 million seeds for the Reforestation Center, which is great because Maybe it's that. Across the US, there's a huge, as I've been talking about, need for reforestation. It's 133 million acres total. And that would take about 3 billion seeds a year to reforest all that land. So there's just a big need there. Like I was saying, there's this whole reforestation pipeline, and we're kind of need help in each part of that pipeline. We need help with the workforce, we need help with the technical pieces. And the crazy thing to me is that only this handful of universities are doing anything on reforestation. I mean, most forestry programs don't even have a class on reforestation because it was something that just wasn't considered as important. So even though there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of opportunities, and that's what we're trying to do here in New Mexico. With our 2020 Forest Action Plan, we sort of laid out the needs here, starting with seed, and then going through nursery, some of the climate modeling for seedling survival, how to plant the trees, where to plant the trees on the landscape. And we're not just doing it as a state agency, but we're in partnership with New Mexico Highlands University, UNM, and New Mexico State, who have some of the top researchers in the country on reforestation, which is great. And then that's all for today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm sorry for the technical flip-flops there. Next, we're going to hear from Lauren Kramer. She works with the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, and she is going to talk with us about forest resources and information for adaptation decisions and a new decision support tool.
Thank you. Looks like my slides are a little wonky. That's fun. We'll see what that looks like. But yeah, so I'm Lauren Kramer. I'm with the Southwest Climate Hub, and today I'm really excited to debut this decision support tool that I've been working pretty hard to develop. So you guys get to see it first. So really excited to share it with you all. Yeah, woo! And basically what this tool is this is a library, a resource library of climate adaptation, decision support tools to help in forest stewardship in the Southwest.
Yeah, I don't know.
We'll see if it's content.
Maybe what's on the screen. Not that. There you go.
Okay, awesome. So I'm so fortunate enough to work with Emily's team at the Southwest Climate Hub. And so we are one of 10 regions across the nation. We cover Utah, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Hawaii, and the US affiliated Pacific Islands. And so what we do at the Hub is really work towards translating climate science into action. And how we do this is really bridging the gap between scientists and researchers to the folks who are really boots on the ground, ranchers, foresters, and resource managers, and getting that information to the folks who need it the most. And so we work in 3 main work streams: science and data syntheses, technology, tool development and support, and then outreach, convening, and training. And so today you're going to get a little peek into kind of what we do as far as tool development. Okay, I was like, oh no, there's things missing. Okay, we're good. So in the Southwest, and Zeidel really touched on this, but forests in the Southwest really provide habitat, clean water and air, recreational opportunities, economic benefits, as well as a cultural importance. But along with drought, like we've heard yesterday and today, some of these impacts that are affecting everywhere else are also affecting forests. So there are those more frequent, high severity, catastrophic, stand replacing fires. There's increased pest and disease pressure, as well as increased invasive species and decreased soil moisture and snowpack. And so the folks who are really stewarding these forests, like resource managers and foresters, really have a lot to think about when it comes to what actions they're going to implement on the ground to adapt to climate change. And so among all of these things that foresters and resource managers have to think about, climate change is really that other consideration that just happens to affect all of the above. And so with that added climate pressure, foresters and resource managers really rely on some of these tools and resources to help them implement these things on the ground. And so we have the manager's dilemma here, where she's like, where do I even start? I can't find what I'm looking for. I don't have time to search the internet today, the entirety of the internet, who does? And I'm overwhelmed. So a lot of these tools and resources are really kind of developed with a lack of coordination. There's so many things out there, and they're hard to find. And also resource managers have a lot better things to do than sit on a computer all day, right? So us at the Southwest Climate Hub, we really listened to our partners and resource managers in the region, and we really heard, okay, stop with the tools. We have enough tools, but we really need a tool to find the tools. And so these tools exist. We just need an easier way to find them. And so in collaboration with the South Central, as well as the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Centers, we've collaborated on this project here. And so this is really a two-part project. So that first part is this development of this resource inventory, which is Frida. And the second part is a literature review. So stay tuned. I'm going to be documenting some common garden studies, some data gaps, and some other information to really support a deeper understanding of climate adapted trees in New Mexico and Arizona specifically. And so I borrowed this picture from Emily's presentation yesterday, but so when I was trying to I knew I was going to have to just develop a tool. I'm like, oh no, this is a really this is my face. This is a daunting experience. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. But thankfully, we have an awesome team at the Southwest Climate Hub. I'm very thankful for my colleagues. So they had already created tools for the beef industry, or Toby, Frida's older brother. So this is awesome. This framework was already developed with this tool, where ranchers and folks in the beef industry can really find the tools that they need for their work. So the framework was there. So thanks, Sky and Rihanna and everyone who was part of that. And so I created this. This is terrifying, right? So I spent a lot of time really curating these resources, putting all of this into an Excel document, which is, no one wants to look at this, right? But so thanks to the folks at the Jornada and NMSU, we have some awesome computer scientists. We were able to turn this into that. That's better, right? So this is the homepage of Frida. This is what it looks like right now. And so it's live. So you guys are able to scan that QR code. I think you also have a sheet with that QR code as well. There's also the link at the bottom here. But so what Frida allows and why it's helpful is that it's searchable. So users can really easily query kind of based on their needs, their interests, and their resource areas that they're working in to find what they need really quickly. And also it's region specific. So a thing that we heard as well from managers and our partners is that a lot of the resources available are not really specific to the Southwest. And as we all know, the Southwest is pretty unique. And it's really important to have those specific climate considerations in mind for the Southwest. So these are region specific. Right now, they're currently focused on the Southwest region, especially New Mexico and Arizona. And also the great thing is that this website is hosted on the Jornada's website, so it can be maintained and updated by Climate Hub staff, aka me for now. But we're currently updating it, and of course, as you know, more tools are being developed, the science is changing, so this can be changed and updated as kind of things change and things come out. And so the intended user again of this is really those resource managers, the foresters, and those decision makers that are stewarding the Southwest forests. And so this is weird to do this on a slide, but I'm going to try to give you a little virtual tour of Frida. I encourage you to check it out on your phones as well, or when you're back at your computer. But this is that homepage again. And so for the purpose of today, I use that search box that's at the top. And I just typed in drought, and what's really nice is our search box will kind of automatically populate some terms. So as you're kind of starting to type things out, it will try to get smart and try to think what you're looking for. So that's nice. And then, so once you hit search, we search for drought, this whole list of resources starts to come up. And this resource was really interesting to me. So I clicked on it, and this is Goats as a Tool for Fire Management on the Pueblo of Sandia. So this is really cool. When you click on this resource specifically, you can see more details about the resource. You can see who was involved, what organizations, who authored it, the direct link to that resource, as well as a brief description about the resource. And then we have some topics. So besides just that search box, we also have some filters to use. So currently we have 36 topic areas. And so every resource that's in Frida currently is involved with it, or is related to at least one or multiple of these topics. And thanks to Rihanna, she created these awesome icons, so it's fun and it looks exciting and engaging. But these are some great topics. I think there's probably things we can add as we get feedback from folks. But these were great. I'm really excited about the Indigenous stewardship topic, as well as the urban and community forest topic. So I'm excited to see all those together. And then the next filter you can choose is region. So as I said, this is really specific to the Southwest region, but some of these resources are also available in other states or other regions, or even internationally. So you can see that there. And then you can select platform. So this is really nice, where you get to see kind of, this is not just journal articles, we have case studies, we have podcasts, we have funding sources. So a user can really choose kind of directly what kind of resource type that they want to look for. And then the last one is vegetation type. So this came after some initial feedback from our partners, where we added in a filter to be able to kind of select which vegetation type or ecosystem type you're interested in. So say you're managing pinyon juniper woodlands, you can go in and directly select that and see the resources that are associated with that. And so where do we go from here? So we're going to be hosting listening sessions in early 2024 to hear feedback from our partners. We have 2 events, probably virtual. They're still in the works, but one in New Mexico in collaboration with New Mexico State Forestry Division, with Rachel's friends and colleagues there, and then also with Zeidel's organization, the Ecological Restoration Institute. So really focusing on those 2 states. And then I just want to ask you, where else should we share it? Please share it also. Please do. But yeah, please definitely let me know your feedback. And then also, potentially we're thinking about some other places to share this. Christian in Hawaii is already on my case, so we will, that's kind of in the works in the future to add Hawaii as well. And yeah, please share your feedback with me. That would be awesome. And with that, thank you.